How to leverage Alteryx ML in the lead. Oh, getting closer to predictive attrition use cases. No, the race is on. I like the 13% trying to achieve leader buy-in for ML projects. You guys are the road pavers, the rock stars. Okay, I think I see this number stopped moving on the polls. So it looks like first place is how to leverage Alteryx machine learning. And then second place, we've got predictive attrition use cases. All right, Stephen, I think I'm going to wrap up this poll. Seems like the votes stopped coming in and we'll move on.
Okay, before Stephen introduces the two use cases that he's going to cover today and that he's solving with Alteryx Machine Learning, we wanted to give you a brief understanding of what the solution is, the span of use cases that it can help you solve, and why it enables analysts like many of you are to tackle your business challenges with machine learning. So as an AutoML solution, Alteryx Machine Learning automates many of these repetitive and kind of mundane tasks in the data exploration and preparation that have to be tackled as part of a machine learning process. But you'll see as we go through this that it does so in an easily approachable manner so that team members new to machine learning can leverage this successfully. The user interface is going to guide users through the full machine learning process. We have education mode embedded that goes further, providing you with definitions and descriptions of what's happening at each step and what to do next. The next point that often is a deterrent for machine learning, and maybe many of you are struggling with in getting that buy-in for machine learning projects, is that some solutions are black boxes, and that can be a real deterrent. But our solution is leveraging the best-in-class open source Python algorithms that are trusted by data scientists everywhere. It's going to expose these, though, providing the transparency that is needed to really leverage machine learning and trust it. As you go through the process, perhaps the most important step is really that evaluation step. So you have to evaluate the models that you're building to gain that trust and understand really the business process that you're trying to model. You'll see those today with useful visualizations and interactive what-if simulations, so you can really dive deep into those business processes. Alteryx also provides a tailored upskilling program to educate you and help ensure success. There are a large number, though, of use cases that can be tackled beyond people analytics that we're going to discuss today. So let's take a look at a couple of those first. We're looking at a breadth now of high-value use cases that can be enabled with machine learning. Today, Stephen's going to talk about how he's tackling employee attrition and successive hires for our own people analytics department. Similar to employee attrition, though, many industries are also tackling things like its sister use case, customer churn. We see this across industries like banking and telecom. But there are other lines of business that are pretty ubiquitous to organizations that have common use cases as well. Use cases like cash flow analysis and forecasting is very common in finance departments. And supply chain departments usually want to take a look at shipping delays and planning. And all of these can be worked on with the Alteryx machine learning solution and tackled with machine learning here. Internally, we've also leveraged our own solution to improve email open rates from 12 to 20%. So there's a lot of uses in marketing. And we work with organizations to improve sales processes as well, with use cases like lead scoring and product cross-sell that are so key to efficiency, cost savings, and improved customer experience. Now let's go ahead and get to know Stephen and the use cases he's tackling.
Awesome. Thanks, Barrett. All right, well, I thought I'd introduce myself in Alteryx fashion with a little workflow right here. And so if you start with me on the left, this is kind of where my background starts. I don't come from a data science background. I actually come from more of an HR background. And so I got a degree in industrial labor relations from Cornell. And towards the end of that, started to lean into the analytics space, really thought that was interesting, really thought it's kind of the future of HR, really. And I was lucky enough to get into a people analytics team. My first company that I worked at with was Collins Aerospace. So I worked there as a consultant, working with some of the business units. And luckily, while I was there, I got a hold of a license for Alteryx, and that kind of changed the trajectory of my career by quite a bit. I got certified while I was there, was able to use it in numerous use cases, and just really fell in love with the product. And within a little bit of time, I was able to find a role within Alteryx that kind of fit my skill set too. So I joined Alteryx about 1.5 years ago, and have been working in people analytics capacity since then too. Our team is small but mighty, so there's 2 of us, and we kind of handle everything that your traditional people analytics team would handle, including reports and dashboards, data engineering, consulting, advanced analytics, and automation. So kind of do everything. And really the only reason that we can do all of that with just the 2 of us is because of Alteryx and how kind of the automation and the speed of things. Alteryx makes that possible. So I do want to provide a little bit more context into our own background, kind of what we use at the company. I won't go over this in depth really, but this is just to kind of give a little bit of flavor as far as some of the data sources that we work with, as well as the applications that we're using. So in a lot of ways, we're pretty agnostic in the types of sources that we're using. So we're not kind of consolidating. We're able to kind of choose the best solution for our needs. And because we have Alteryx, we're able to kind of knit together that data and pull out insights, both within an individual tool, but also cross tools as well. So we use it from ETL, all the way from ETL purposes to analyses to machine learning as well. So there's that. I do want to cover a little bit about how we use Alteryx internally across the employee lifecycle. Really, it's our main tool of choice when we're doing anything people analytics related, and we kind of use that throughout the employee lifecycle. So all the way from attract, all the way to exiting too. I'll dive a little bit more deeper into a couple of these during the use case section, specifically the success of hire, as well as the predictive attrition portion. But I do want to mention a couple of these other ones too, and just a little bit more color. I think many HR departments are probably familiar with this one on the onboarding section of how HR and finance might have slightly different numbers. This was important for us because we have slightly different forecasts specifically for our onboarding team. And it's really important for them to have really accurate forecasting so that they can properly staff kind of the onboarding events that we have. We have on-site onboarding. And so they really have to kind of plan around that. And so making sure that we have kind of an accurate forecast for that. This was pretty cool because this was on my to-do list earlier this year, and actually someone on our TA team who also has a license, I mean, we all do it within Alteryx, was able to kind of build out the solution for themselves. So that's really where, analytics is kind of pushing it down to those who know it best. We have also looked at remote hub identification. So this is things where, we have a hybrid workforce, and looking at where we might have hubs of remote employees to help organize volunteering events or get-togethers, so that there is some sort of connection for these remote individuals. We've been able to use a lot of the spatial tools within Alteryx to make that happen. Under the Engage section, this is really an area that we are going to be exploring much more in depth this year. But we're going to be looking at employee sentiment trends, looking at employee surveys. And then if we do those on a more regular basis, we're able to use a tool called Auto Insights that is relatively new to our platform as well, which allows us to look at time series data. So it pulls out automatically insights that we may not have noticed ourselves to identify where areas where employee sentiment might be increasing or decreasing. So we'll use a combination of both our text analytics tools, which are in our intelligence suite, as well as the Auto Insights tool. We also did a annual comp refresh letter. So these are using our reporting tool, so it generates nice PDFs. I actually used my own letter to apply for an apartment recently, so they came in quite handy for myself, and I'm sure for many others. Like I said, I'll dive a little bit deeper into the predictive attrition model in just a minute. And then as well as the exiting piece, we have a lot of workflows that are hosted in our server so that we don't kind of set it and forget it pretty much. and so that those workflows are fully automated. So they're pulling data from source systems and sending them to dashboards or other applications as well. So that's that. Do you want to dive into the first use case, which is predictive attrition? Now, this first use case, I'm not going to be going too deep on the technical side because our next use case, I'll be doing that and actually pulling up a demo of the Alteryx Machine Learning tool. But I did want to talk a little bit about the program and kind of how this works within Alteryx and what we're trying to accomplish. And ideally, this is pretty much what it is. Machine learning at its simplest is just looking at patterns of data, and I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with that as well. So we're looking at past patterns to identify who might be at higher flight risk in terms of individuals. In this program specifically, we're looking at kind of two different angles. One is the individual angle and the other is the company-wide angle. So are there individuals that we might need to target and help retain, or is there anything that we could do to help them encourage to stay? And then company-wide retention, are some of the insights that we gain from that model. Is there something that we need to be doing differently as a company from either a policy or a cultural standpoint that we can address? And this model kind of helps with both of those. So in terms of, again, the program side, we'll dive into the technical side on the next use case. But on the program side, we're really kind of partnering with the business on this one. And this one's critical to have business buy-in. Otherwise, you're just going to be creating this fancy model that just doesn't really do much. And we want to make sure that we're, taking action and that we're driving, results as a result of this this machine learning model. So we developed model. We're refining it. We're going to continue to refine it as more data comes in, and then we generate a list of those that might be higher risk of leaving the organization. We'll also develop a kind of a tracking tool to make sure that we're taking action on this as well. We'll then send that list over to a list of HRBPs who will coordinate with managers to have some sort of stay discussion. This is a practice that we have within the organization in general, but this is maybe a little bit more focused and making sure that we're kind of targeting and spending our time best with some of these maybe higher risk individuals. And then between the HRBP and the manager, they're going to decide, are there any actions that we need to take as a result of this conversation? Is there a workload balancing that we need to do? Is there something else that maybe a compensation adjustment or possibly nothing? Maybe just the conversation itself was good enough. Those are kind of left up to them to decide what they want to do, and then we'll track that action. So over time, we're going to be seeing how effective each of these different actions are in retaining individuals, and we'll be able to kind of do some more or less kind of randomized studies to see how effective this whole program is in retaining individuals. In the short term, we've only done kind of one cohort of this, so we'll be doing kind of more cohorts coming up soon. But despite all the changes that we've had in the labor market and at our own company, we've grown substantially over the last couple of years. It's really generated quite accurate predictions as far as who might be at higher risk. And so we're really taking that as promising results to, going forward, that we can, drive some action out of this. So out of this first cohort that we haven't had any voluntary terminations. Obviously, this is more anecdotal at this point, but hopefully with a larger data set, we'll be able to draw some more conclusive results from this as well. With that, I'm going to pause for another poll question that we got. And Jonathan will take that away.
All right. Poll is up. All right, the polls are coming in. It looks like in the next 0 to 6 months, most of you are going to begin implementing predictive analytics. I'm glad you made it to this webinar on time, right? Just in time for this webinar. There we go. And we see we've got an even split of 17% doing it within the next 6 to 12 months, as well as the next 1 to 2 years. And 24, almost 25% already implementing. I'm curious if those who implementing are currently implementing with Alteryx, or if there's other things you're using for predictive analytics. But hopefully this webinar encourages you to consider us. There we go, with Alteryx. Way to go.
There we go. We won't be mad, but we'll be extra happy
We won't be
if it's
mad.
with us.
All right, it looks like the polls died down. I don't think people are responding anymore, so I'm gonna click done here and close the poll, and we can move on. Tally final totals: 43% are implementing in the next 0 to 6 months.
Good stuff. All right. We'll dive into our next use case, which is successive hire. This one we've had quite a bit of focus on with how much that we've been hiring within the company, making sure that we can hire the best talent, and I'm sure everyone is thinking that as well. So in terms of the project goals for this project, we're really trying to identify levers within the recruiting process that we can kind of change to increase the likelihood of success for candidates or new hires rather. And that has two kind of specific outcomes similar to the employee retention use case. There is kind of a company-wide angle and a more individual angle. For this one internally, we really focused on the company-wide angle first. And that's really because one, some of the insights kind of lent themselves that way. But then two, you really have to be careful when you're making any hiring decisions based off of machine learning models. You want to make sure that there's no bias within that process too. I think there's numerous stories out there of articles talking about how machine learning models are essentially used with or baked with bias into it based on the historical data that you're using. So you really want to make sure that any insights that you're pulling out of it, if you're making individual decisions on it, you really need to do some sort of diversity analysis as well. So you're not impacting certain groups negatively as well. That said, the company-wide insights are still extremely valuable and can help us kind of shape our overall strategy, which is what we did internally. Again, on this use case, dive a little bit more into the data side of things. And so really the first problem that you have to solve is trying to figure out what you care about in terms of success. What does success look like for your organization? It could be wildly different than what we consider success within Alteryx. There's a couple of maybe more generic outcomes that you might want to focus on, things like performance or retention. Retention typically because as an employee stays longer, they're more effective at their job, and they're also reduce costs with retention as well. But there's other types of performance, and that could be pretty wide ranging. So you could look at ratings if you have those, promotion rates, sales attainment for sales forces. But it could be more specific to your industry too. So maybe it's customer satisfaction if you're looking in a more service industry as well. So that one is going to be very specific to your company. For our use case internally, we focus primarily on the retention side of things, but we did look at some of the other stuff, and then going forward, we'll probably be looking at more some of the sales side of things as well. For the use case that I'll be demoing, we do have a kind of a fake data set, if you will, and that's going to be using kind of sales attainment just to kind of illustrate some of the concepts. The next step that you really have to think about is what are the data elements that you think drive that success metric? And ideally, those are things that you can either change or modify within the process so that you can generate higher success rates. So things like source of hire, where we're hiring from, what types of compensation that we're offering when they initially come in, whether they have industry experience or not, how long it's taking to bring those candidates in, how many candidates we're interviewing, what types of scores that we're getting on those interviews, as well as some of the manager, maybe some of the impact is because the manager is a higher performing manager and is able to extract more. It sounds, that's a poor choice of words, extract, but maybe get more value out of their direct reports. So that, I want to pull up the demo. So let me escape out of here. Pull that up. All right, here I've got this loaded up right here. This is our Alteryx Machine Learning, and this is going to be our cloud-based product as well. So everything's cloud, which has a lot of benefits to that as well. But you're going to have it's going to walk you through a process of, starting with what are you trying to solve and what data do you need in order to solve that. And it kind of walks you through that entire process. So we're going to start with getting started right here. And I really just I don't want to go through maybe every single step, but I do want to highlight a few things that were really helpful in our process when we were kind of implementing this within Alteryx. And one of the things initially is when you load in your data, it does kind of an automatic analysis on it to see if it's good data or not. And one of the things that we wanted to really include was interview scores, but we only started collecting those about a year ago. And so a lot of the historical data that we had didn't really have interview scores. And this was able to identify that, it's missing a lot of data and this isn't going to be helpful. So if I click here, the see details, you can see some of the jobs it does in the data checks. One of the data checks is right here is the kind of a null check, and it will actually have a recommended action. And so for the interview scores, unfortunately, one of the recommended action was to remove it from the model just because we didn't have enough of it to really make sense in that at this point. So going forward, hopefully, give it some more time. We'll be able to include that in the model so that we can see kind of how we're scoring candidates. Does that actually have an impact on success rates? We'll be able to see that going forward. But for now, that was really helpful. Next thing I want to highlight is down here in the data insights. If we come here to this next stage, we've got some correlation matrices, so you can see kind of the relationship between different factors in your model. And some of these may not, if you're not super familiar with machine learning, maybe some of these numbers don't mean a whole lot to you. And so a couple of the fields that we had included in the model was both time to fill and time to offer. And you kind of see both of them right up here in this little really super dark square right here. And I was curious, maybe there was some, interaction between the two of them that could be interesting. But really what we found is, it really only helped to include one of them. And one of the ways that we learn that is by clicking the Learn More function up here. You can also click on the little icon, this education mode right here. And this will kind of walk you through, not only on this tab, but on all the other tabs too, what's happening behind the scenes and how would you interpret essentially all of this. So this, if you come down here, talks about some of the correlation and talks about two kind of features that are highly correlated with each other. You can see that, it talks about it's not going to impact prediction accuracy necessarily, but it could impact how you interpret that model. And so it might make sense, depending on your context, to maybe focus on one of them. And so that's what we decided to do, is really to just focus on one of them. And so we excluded the other one. And that was just made really easy based on the education mode, especially for someone like me who maybe doesn't come from a data science background as well. Next thing I want to jump to is all the way down in the evaluate model section right here when we're looking at kind of the output of the model. If you come to the insight section, this is where the model value really kind of started coming to light for our team. And, I've been exposed to machine learning models in the past, and often it's almost kind of like a black box. You toss it in, you get some predictions, but you don't get much else. And so this is really just helpful to kind of increase that transparency to understand, what are things that are important in your model, and then how are those things related to your target as well. So we can see that some of the things that are important are including interview count, our source of hire, some of our compensation data, like our our commission rate, as well as our starting market ratio, as well as manager performance. We can see are all important. But more than that, we can actually see the partial dependence, which really just means if that individual, data element, how does that relate to our output variable? And I did mention in this model, we were looking at sales attainment. Again, this is fake data, so don't read anything into this in our organization. But it does kind of show a relationship between, a certain variable, like in this case, interview count, and sales attainment. And sales attainment would be a kind of a what percentage are you hitting your targets, essentially. So anything above a 1 is you're hitting over 100% of your target. So we can see that if we come right here, if we click on the more relative, so we kind of expand that view a little bit, we can start seeing a relationship between some of these variables. So in the case of interview count, we can see that attainment is actually peaking around 4 interviewed candidates. And so, whereas 1 or 2 maybe doesn't have, a little bit lower effect, and it starts to tail off around this other, on more than 4. So if we're making some strategies from a talent acquisition team perspective, we can really encourage hiring managers to consider 4, but anything beyond that doesn't necessarily yield more. And intuitively, that kind of makes sense. You've maybe got some managers that just want to keep seeing candidates, they're indecisive, and you just need to ultimately make a decision. But then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, some managers that maybe only want to see one, and then they're done. And both from a sales attainment, but also from a diversity side of things, you also want to make sure that we're considering multiple candidates within our process as well. Things like source of hire, this is where things that, you can see which sources have a higher relationship with attainment. And so you can see in this specific example, referrals tend to have higher attainment rates too. Commission rates, this is another thing where you could kind of see that relationship where, what percent commission should we start offering individuals? And you can see quite a steep climb in between kind of 25% and 30-something% right around here in terms of commission rates. And so this tells me, if I was a talent acquisition person making offers to individuals, that we're actually going to possibly get more attainment if we're able to offer more, a higher commission rate. But that benefit starts to kind of fall off once we hit right around here, which is around 32%. And so maybe it makes sense to increase it back from 25 up to here, but maybe not from here to over here. So that's really helpful insight. Similar with the market ratio. So this would be kind of your base salary compared to market. We can see that maybe it would make sense to, offer a higher salary to individuals. Now, this could have other factors in it. So this could maybe mean we're, the types of people that we're hiring are demanding, higher salaries, and those are the individuals that are possibly higher achieving. So this one could maybe warrant a little bit more analysis as well, but it does give us a great starting point in terms of, insights for our organization. Same thing with manager performance. We kind of see this relationship between performance ratings for managers. So those with top performance ratings of 5, maybe they're able to coach individuals and their teams a little bit better. And so maybe it makes sense if we're, in terms of if we're stuck with how many people we're going to hire, maybe we prefer to allow the managers with high performance to hire first, so that they can, coach their team a little bit better as well. So really cool stuff from the insights portion of this tool. This was really impactful in our internal study as well, and I'll show you some of those results in just a moment. But the last thing I just want to mention is also some of the simulations right here. This is really helpful too if you're looking at individual use cases, or you just want to play around with some of the kind of the inputs. You can come in here and say, well, if we interviewed 4 people, and if we offered, this much in terms of starting salary, if I click run up here, what would their sales attainment be, which would be their target variable? And this could depend on, what exactly you're trying to predict, but this will kind of give you that tool. So based on these assumptions right here, our sales attainment would be basically 140% compared to what we started with before. So this could be a really helpful tool depending on what you're doing. And then like, any machine learning model, you can export this and use this model kind of an ongoing basis too. So you can export it into an Alteryx workflow and use it and kind of deploy it, if you will, as well. But I do want to highlight kind of internally how we were able to use it. And here we go. So based on the insights that we gained from this model, we're able to kind of steer away from our hiring managers away from higher cost sources of hire that maybe didn't have as a strong impact on success as they thought they did. And because of that shift away from those higher cost sources of hire, we're actually able to save quite a bit of money on a quarterly basis. This is an estimate based on kind of prior rates of hiring from those sources compared to today's hiring rates, and also adjusted to today's kind of lower hiring volume just due to the macroeconomic environment as well. So pretty substantial, ROI from this use case. And not only that, but because of this, we also instituted better data collection practices too. So we really wanted to use interview scores within our model, and we unfortunately weren't able to just because we didn't have enough of that data. And so we made some of that process a little bit more required within the process, within the hiring process as well, so that going forward, we'll be able to have better insights and hopefully better results of the model as well. So this isn't really a one and done, but something that we hope to kind of iterate on going forward, and hopefully we'll see, even greater savings or value out of this model. So happy to answer questions on this, but before we do that, we do have another poll question. Get some thoughts from the crowd.
Popped up on the screen. I'm seeing budget as an answer. Demand and volume. Okay. Attrition. Glad we covered that. Whoa, 40 of them just dropped. Diversity, sales volume, material consumption, hiring needs. Someone wrote years. A few people wrote years. I think they mean years at the company. Planning and optimization is wonderful. Chain planning. Okay. People want to predict no-shows. That's funny. I would love that in sales. Do a little
Is
machine
that
learning
people
analytics.
that aren't going to show up maybe for their first day after they've been hired?
Not sure what no-shows
That's a really interesting use case. Is that something you guys have looked at, Stephen?
Our workforce is primarily professionals, so we don't have too much of that issue, but I know in more kind of production environments, absenteeism is a hot topic that you may want to consider. Historically, that's something big to think about.
Right.
Awesome. Well, the number one response was hiring. So I'm glad we covered a bit of that today. And for everybody on this webinar, just heads up, we'll be able to follow up with you and explore these further if you wish. So you have our contacts, and you can reach out to us. I will probably have your corresponding account executive at Alteryx reach out to you and see if we can assist with any of these goals. All right, it looks like the responses have slowed down. I'm going to wrap up the poll and thank everybody for participating.
Yeah, we do want to open up for kind of additional Q&A too, but we do have some additional resources here too.
Yeah. While people have time to type in some additional questions, there was one that Mateus brought up. Yeah. He was asking, what key data did you find most important for the predictive attrition model?
The predictive attrition model, because I've been so in the successive hire model for such a long time. Source of hire was interesting. Obviously, tenure is a factor as far as how long they are in their tenure. How long they've been in their compensation grade was important, as well as their compensation, how their compensation was relative to market. So a lot of these things that are pretty intuitive made sense. Other things that didn't make that didn't have really an impact that we thought we would is whether they were remote or not. I thought that would maybe be a key factor in determining whether if someone's near an office, maybe they're getting more engagement from their team members, or if they're remote. And there really wasn't a difference between that, so that was quite encouraging to see from our approach, which has been a hybrid approach. So I wouldn't say there was one primary factor that was driving attrition, but it was a combination of multiple, which is really where machine learning shines, because you're able to kind of consider multiple factors at once. You're not really just doing a kind of a chart with one factor versus another factor. So, but that's a great question. Yeah, and I'm sure it's quite different in each organization, and it could be different in 6 months when we run the model again, too.
Rachel has been putting some of the resources that we're mentioning here on screen in the chat, so you should be able to grab links to those. We do also want to mention that we are planning to have another webinar on people analytics. We're hoping to do so in the June timeframe. So for those of you that want to attend, we will be having an external expert in people analytics join us, and he'll be able to talk to it from another industry perspective, but still from people analytics and how they're leveraging Alteryx machine learning. That gentleman is named Dr. Shane Asmus, and he is also going to be at Inspire if people wanted to reach out and be able to connect with him there. But as we get that time set up, we'll be sure to let people know that the second in the series of people analytics webinars is ready to go and they can register. We're excited to have him.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So.
Barrett, looks like we have another couple questions in chat.
All right. So on predictive attrition again, Anya is asking, would you recommend creating different models for different populations, such as corporate versus bulk hire positions, and also comparatively different models between US and remote countries? Are you seeing it that working at a general model is better?
Yeah, my answer is probably going to be pretty political, and that it depends probably. I think it depends on your organization. If you feel like there is a significant difference in the types of individuals in those different groups, and then the second consideration I would have is just the volume of data that you have for each of those groups. So the nice thing is with something like a tool like this, you're able to kind of iterate pretty quickly. So you could kind of do both or all three approaches, at the same time, without having to kind of spend a lot of different effort, a lot of effort. I would probably be inclined to do that if you feel like the populations are pretty different. So, working at Collins Aerospace, we have a large production employee population working in factories and kind of related to that type of work versus a more office type population. And I think in that sense, there's quite a bit of data because there's large populations in both. So it would have made sense to kind of look at both. So that would be my answer. The geography question, obviously there's going to be a lot of labor market differences between geographies. Our population was pretty small, so we kind of included them all together, and one of the factors we included was country in the model as well. And so it does maybe consider location in it. But if you do have kind of larger populations within certain geographies that you want to focus on that you feel are different, then yeah, it would make sense to do that.
There was a question on hosting different types of use cases. We do have some internal folks working in our own finance organization. So I love that particular request, and we can certainly look into that. And Paige asks, what benefits does machine learning have for these use cases, namely attrition, success of hire, over the other predictive tools in Alteryx Designer? So let me answer in general and then turn it over to you, Stephen.
Yep.
The Alteryx machine learning solution as an AutoML solution, we did some kind of brute force analysis on our own in how much benefit and speed to value could really be gained with this solution versus those predictive palette solutions. So our estimate based on what experts that would be good at both could do is that they would see a 5 to 10x improvement in speed to value with the AutoML solution as if they were using those predictive palette tools, because so much is done for you and in parallel with the AutoML solution. Now, that said, that there are additional capabilities, most of which Stephen spent most of his time on today as he was demoing, that are not a part of those other solutions. So those were really digging into the dependency plots and understanding the nuances of those important features so that you could drive real business insight from them and that simulation. So it really is that speed to value and then these additional features that really give you insights as opposed to just a model. Now, let's turn it on its head, though, and say, Stephen, you introduced yourself as an analyst. Mm-hmm. How easy would it be for you to try to do this same work with those singleton predictive palette tools?
Yeah, so I've used the kind of the Brown tools in Designer before, and have become somewhat comfortable with them. But there's a lot of like Barrett mentioned, just a lot of features within this with Alteryx Machine Learning that just made it a lot easier, both for myself as well as for those that I'm communicating to. So those dependency plots, for example, I was able to just essentially screenshot that in presentations to senior leadership, and that by themselves kind of explained kind of exactly what we're trying to do and some of the actions that we would like to take. So I think time to communication is decreased quite significantly. If you're not comfortable with that, also I think the speed is even greater because I think within HR typically I think we're one of the last functions to really dive into the data science space, and so we may not have as many data science resources as some of the other organizations, or just in general right now because of the labor market, trying to be a little bit tighter with budgets. And so by having kind of a more guided experience with some education materials within it, I think you can take a team that aren't necessarily experts in data science, or more maybe data science curious, and you're able to generate insights with that team or with that analyst without having to necessarily, find a PhD in data science. So I don't know if that was exactly what you're looking for, but those were the things that were really helpful for us.
All right, we've got another one coming in. Mary asks, do we have an example or any suggestions on how to use machine learning when there are specific goals you want to meet? i.e., you have a goal of 50% females in the function by 2030. Okay. So we do have some examples on how you might look at this type of bias on the website. I'm not sure, Rachel, do you have any other specific recommendations on how to approach this?
Off the top of my head, just kind of thinking about it, I think a lot of it would depend on your data and what you have available. So you could see what are the specific drivers, especially by area, like if some areas are hiring more females than others. So there's a few different ways that you could slice this, but that is a very interesting use case. But that's more of, I view that as more of a tracking over time. And then looking, so it'd almost be two ways. So tracking over time, you could do something with that, like with Auto Insights, which is another one of our solutions, and then using machine learning to see what are the primary drivers to reaching that goal so that you can make sure that you're enforcing those.
Yeah, I know when we were discussing this internally, Stephen, you mentioned that for the use cases that we discussed today, from a legal standpoint, you removed some of these traditionally, protected classes of, human aspects from the model on purpose, and that's a common one. But for bias, I know that this was a key interest of yours. Have you guys started to approach how we're going to tackle it here at Alteryx and leveraged our solution set to start to plan that out? As Rachel mentioned, like this is an over time type of issue.
Yeah, I mean, this specific use case that you kind of attacked it from multiple approaches. And so kind of we use Designer to look at trends, diversity trends in general. So how are we trending towards certain, goals, if you will. And then we also use some of our predictive capabilities to look at pay equity, for example. I know this is kind of branching out from what you're asking, but And then if we were to do something more on an individual basis where we're looking at kind of making decisions based on machine learning models, what we would do is essentially take the output and then run it through some tests to see if that comes back with anything biased. And if it does, then we need to rework something, either kind of modify the data that comes in or something to that nature. We haven't got to those steps yet. So I think there's a lot of different approaches to it. And I think they all kind of need to be taken, if you will, because that's a kind of a long-term goals that we have as well.
Okay. So it sounds like multi-pronged approach. Look at where we are now, whether there's bias, the rates, monitor with some of our monitoring solutions. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
If you're shy and just want to chat about people analytics, you can always hit me up later too. Find me on LinkedIn or send me a message.
All right. I think we're coming up on the hour anyways. So if there aren't any questions, we've got these resources posted in the chat. We will work on getting this webinar posted on demand so that you can re-review it and or share it with friends. And we'll look into being able to send out this set of resources as well, and whether that's going to be possible, like one of the first questions that came through. All right.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Thanks everybody for joining. We
thank you,
appreciate
everyone.
having you all.